Since we've reached the halfway point in 2024, yes, I know, you can panic now, but I want everyone to do a quick reflection of the year so far. Remember that exciting New Year's resolution that you made at the beginning of the year that you're so keen to get started on? Well, this was my motivation to time graph of that habit. When I started noticing how much I deviated from my goals and initial habits, I decided to go on a little self-help journey, searching for the best time management techniques that would instantly boost your productivity and top 10 scheduling apps that could help manage your schedule. I know, we've all been down this rabbit hole. But that's when I revisited the book Atomic Habits, which I bought all the way back in November, but just kind of left in the corner of the room to collect dust. As said by the author of the book, James Clear, your desired outcomes in life are just a lagging measure of your habits. And to make time your ally, you must employ these effective habits. Now, these acquired behavior patterns that become seemingly automatic accumulate to 43% of everyday actions. How you tied your shoes this morning, or even how you deal with stress for an upcoming deadline, comes from repeated practice that reduces cognitive load. This book, other habit information, medical journals, and philosophy have opened my eyes to the power of habits that, despite being in plain sight, are neglected by the majority of the world, dictating who we are versus who we could be. Now, if we actually look at the etymology of the word habit, it can be broken down to the two words habir, which means to possess, and habitus, meaning condition. Often, the struggle to achieving long-term goals is not because of how specific or smart the goal really is, but rather the associated identity that reinforces the habit and habits that shape our identity. Every action or habit stems from a system of beliefs that reflects the individual's identity. Now imagine a scenario where Bob, the bad influential friend, offers Andrew, a recent ex-smoker, a cigarette. In the first scenario, Andrew responds with, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Now don't get me wrong, this is a completely acceptable response. His associated identity is still of a smoker who's trying to quit and become someone who doesn't. Now, what if Andrew responds with, "No thank you, I'm not a smoker"? Despite the small shift in phrasing, it reveals a change in his self-perception, as he no longer believes that smoking is a part of his current life, and he has already embraced a new mindset. The phenomenon of identity-induced habits can also be found through medical research in smoking identity. The stronger a person associates themselves with this so-called smoker identity and accepts it, the more likely they will sustain and positively rationalize about this habit instead of choosing to quit. Similarly, the initiation and solidification of the habit is due to the repeated purchasing of cigarettes and cigarette lighting. Every action or behavior steers us either closer or further from the ideal person we want to become. Eventually, with enough repetition as evidence, our story and internal judgment of ourselves will naturally change. Transitioning from identity and more to habit formation, how bad can habits really become? Well, from a list of habits that I've observed in my peers, you can see that on the left-hand side of the scale, we have habits such as swearing, binge-watching TV, and consuming social media, which are acceptable but still somewhat undesirable. And as we move to the right, we have habits such as consuming fast food, sleeping late, until we reach detrimental habits like smoking. Now, you may have noticed that I've already used two examples of smoking to stress the importance of identity. Well, that's because smoking is just a more severe and destructive form of a habit that kills nearly 8 million people a year. Most people believe that smoking addictions are primarily physical, since cigarettes contain nicotine. But the right external cues, cravings, responses, and rewards are equally as important to encouraging any habit. Now, to transform this to a set of applicable rules that we can use to either create or break habits, I want everyone to think back to a crush they've had in the past. Now, bear with me here. When you first see this person, your brain automatically releases dopamine, triggering a craving for a possible reward. If you have classes with them, you're more likely to strike up a conversation or even to make a move. Now, for the lucky some of you, if this person does like you back, then the response and your thoughts will also become easier to communicate. Finally, that satisfaction you get from love and affection is the ultimate reward. Now, applying this to habit formation, in order to encourage good habits, we should try to make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying, and to invert them to break bad habits. These four essential habits, first pieced together by Charles DeHuck in his book, The Power of Habits, then later adapted by James Clear, govern the entire process of habit formation. Now, to break this down into the four parts, how and why is it important to make the cue of the habit invisible? Well, biologically, out of 11 million sensory receptors throughout the human body, 10 million are dedicated to sight, suggesting the importance of environmental design and context-dependent habits. An example of this can be found in social smoking, who are individuals only motivated to smoke when prompted by social settings such as parties or hangouts. By surrounding themselves with other frequent smokers, this also contributes to their smoking identity and promotes justified rationalization. The severity of smoking continues to worsen when the context or cue becomes an individual's entire life. Multiple cues such as feeling bored, feeling stressed, or even sitting in a car becomes associated with smoking. Once a habit has been reinforced, the urge to act becomes automatic whenever the cue emerges. Now, although it is unrealistic to remove every single cue from our environment, we can try to reduce the exposure to negative ones, thereby decreasing the chances of initiating the habit, and to change our environment to promote better habits. If you pay attention to the most disciplined people in your lives, they most likely don't have superhuman willpower that makes them any more resistant to habits than you are, but rather the disciplined environment they've created that prevents them from slipping back. If a smoker has no access to cigarettes, has no money in their wallet, and have left their lighter at home, they're less likely to smoke than someone who has full access to cigarettes, has a wallet full of small bills, and a lighter at the tips of their finger. Moving to the second and third laws of behavior change, we must now address how to make the habit unattractive and difficult. Imagine going back thousands of years before the creation of the first modern piece of technology. If you were to give access to social media to this person, granted they understand the purpose of it, would they crave spending 4 hours a day scrolling through brain-rot content and 15-second long clips until they get bored? Most likely not, since our motives come from a deeper biological desire that's beyond the simple desire of wanting to scroll. Often, activities that grant us love, validation, satisfaction, and status are the real cravings that we use 21st century privileges to solve. Using these primitive underlying motives to our advantage, in a stressful situation, Bob may choose to smoke a cigarette, while Andrew may choose to go on a run or to listen to music. Whenever the habit addresses the cue with the least amount of friction, the more likely you'll repeat it the second time it comes around. Unfortunately, the majority of us have chosen the safest and most familiar coping mechanisms to deal with stress instead of facing our emotions and to reframing our mindset. As said by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychologist, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. Even with the right external cues to remove habits and reframe our identity and mindset, and finally maximize the friction, some habits are still like that favorite snack you have in the middle of the night. You know it's bad for you, but the satisfaction you get is worth that extra few pounds on the scale the next morning. To make habits unsatisfying, a historically simple and effective method is to reduce the satisfaction and to make the cost of our bad habits extreme. Desire initiates and pleasure sustains. Now, when I was in primary school, I was a major iPad kid. Now, whenever my mom came into my room and she saw me looking at my iPad instead of doing homework, she'd simply just grab it, lock it up, and only give it back to me once I finished. By the way, this was the only photo I could find myself reading, so trust me, I was an iPad kid. Mm-hmm. Although this may sound childish or simply immature to apply on teenagers or adults, finding an accountable family member to monitor your behavior is an effective strategy in reducing the satisfaction we get from bad habits. Even in the context of smoking, projects such as the Healthy Family found that family intervention was key in reducing tobacco use. Now that I've talked about the 4 laws of behavior change applied on the habit loop, the power of identity and mindset, you now literally have the tools required to changing 43% of your everyday actions. Yet, I know some of you will probably leave this talk only remembering why a 16-year-old was talking about smoking and something about habit formation. But if there's one thing I want everyone to leave this room remembering, is that you just have to be honest with yourself. Be honest with the habits that you make from your day-to-day life. Be honest of whether these habits are truly in line with the person you want to become and your long-term goals. And finally, owe it to yourself to become the best version of yourself. We can all choose to be Andrew in life and not Bob. Thank you.